In this video, we're going to discuss the repotting of houseplants. When you come around to the early part of the new year, your plants are in their lowest light levels, sometimes at their slowest growth rate that you would have for the whole season. And what we like to consider with plants is some plants will do well when they're root bound for a long period of time by adding fertilizers, and there's a lot of good ones, like there's slow release types, or there's multi-purpose type fertilizers that 20 that you would water every 2 weeks, or as the manufacturer describes, that will carry plants for ages in a root bound situation. And the root bound plants they don't slow down and make all new growth. Sometimes when you first repot, it may interfere with the flowering for a period just because the plant is taking advantage of the new soil you've given it. In our talk here, we'd like to talk about how you go about repotting it. We have a palm here, the Anthoebella palm, and we have a larger size, and yet if we look over here, there's a larger one. Now this plant for certain can become a plant the size of that one and larger if you can keep it in good soil and repaired. You want to have light levels that are acceptable for the type of plant you're growing. You want to keep the moisture at the right level. You have to watch drafts in the wintertime, hot or cold drafts in houseplants. But let's assume that we have a healthy plant, it's just getting a little too tight for its pot. Like if I looked at this little philodendron here, it's got a very small pot, and we would consider moving it up, so we could add soil. One of the simplest ways to repot is to repot into a pot that's large enough to allow extra soil around the container or the root package, and that way you're not sort of depriving the plant, or you're not disturbing it, I should say. So you'd start with a bit of gravel or some sort of a drainage, and it's very important to have that drainage. You may want to use a saucer that's not going to allow it to leak on furniture or what have you, but this pot, if it's a container that has no drainage, then you have to take extreme precautions. Here's some decorative pots. They're beautiful pots, but you have to really allow a lot of drainage area in the bottom of those. Some people will crush old clay pots and use those as part of their drainage. Then you start off with a bit of soil in the bottom of that container. You would remove the plant carefully. Sometimes plant that's overly root bound will need you to use something like a knife or something to run around the edges of the pot to allow it some space. Then you would put soil around this existing root system. And like I said, in this case, we're not disturbing this root system too much. We're adding some extra soil and we're pressing it down fairly firm. We're using a tropical plant mix, which has a lot of perlite and peat moss in the mix, so that the plant is going to have drainage. And this particular pot has a price tag right over its drainage, but it has a drainage hole in the bottom, and when we look close, we'll see the drainage rock that we put in there, and that's what allows the moisture to transfer down through. And if you don't have that, if they stand in water, it's harmful to roots, and you have the risk of getting more salt buildups. Now this plant will go on in this container, and it may eventually be large enough that it'll want to move up into a much larger container. But if we were to put a very small plant in a big container, it sort of stands still for a bit. I would recommend you move them up gradually. It'll pay you to take your time. And depending on what type of plant you're planting, you can buy soil for African violets. You can buy soil for tropical plants. There's soils for starting seeds. There's a bark-based mix for your orchids. There's a lot of really nice products available now, so you don't have to go home and prepare your own soil. You certainly can, and you can work with soil from the garden, but if you're bringing soil in from the garden and using it to pot your plants, sometimes it's better to sterilize it first. You've got a risk of bringing a house full of earwigs or some other insect that that would be not so noticeable in the garden, but it really drive you crazy if you get them in the house. So the idea is to move it up, water it thoroughly when you first plant it. Clay pots are porous; they allow moisture to transfer. So if you like clay, then by all means go with the clay. It absorbs moisture at first, and then it releases it if you forget to water one day. That clay is more forgiving because it allows the moisture back to the plant later on. That would be a start. And the plant size, move it up gradually so you keep the pot manageable. If the plant's gotten large enough that you really can't put new soil around it and still manage the container, you can then start to remove soil carefully so as to not dismantle the roots too badly. You might get more of a setback if you disturb them too much. And if you're moving up, it's always easier. It's kind of like buying a boat. Every one that you have, it's easier to go up. Maybe it's hard when they get really large, but to move from that point. But if you consider just a bit of new soil around the base of the root system on the smaller plant moves you to a plant this size, and it again can move to a larger pot, which in turn can move to a much larger plant, and you will in the process always be assured of having your best growth with these type of plants. We can get a little instrument that will help measure the light levels in your house, and that has a great help for you when you're choosing plants. You can get thermostats, or thermometers I should say, that will allow you to record the high and the low, and then you can reset them as necessary to bring so you know what your high and low was in the spot. You can have a little instrument that slides into the soil, and it'll give you a reading of your moisture levels. Some of these are great when you're starting out. You may, after years, get to a point where the look and the feel is all you need, but on the startup you can decide how much light or what light levels you have to get the right plant for the right place. I hope this helps you in being able to repot your own plants. But if you want to learn more, go to scottsnursery.tv. Oh, and don't forget to like and subscribe.